Hello, a cordial greeting to all, and welcome to Appium Elevate 2022 and to my presentation called Making DevOps Easy with PBAutoBuild and Jenkins. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to mention you about this disclaimer. The content of this presentation is for education purposes only, which I share with the Appium community without any profit. This is not a work for hire by Appium. I am Alex Riofrio. I am the product manager of Appium products in Dora Sistemas for Latin America. I have over 20 years of experience working with PowerBuilder, many years working with PowerServer and the other Appium tools. I worked as sales pre-sales, technical support, and instructor for more than 10 years. You can reach me at my LinkedIn address, as you can see below my picture. About Dora Sistemas, we are Appium master distributor in Latin America with offices in Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and Brazil. We provide technical support in Spanish in Latam. We also provide consulting services and training on Appium tools. The agenda of my presentation is, first, talk about a brief look at DevOps and Jenkins today. Then we'll talk about what PBAutoBuild is, what's new in this latest version, and how to use it in different deployment types for client-server, PowerClient, and PowerServer, considering in this case the client-side and the web API. We will see how to integrate these deployments with PBAutoBuild and Jenkins. And finally, the installation requirements. DevOps and Jenkins today. Software development usually includes two different teams. The development team that develops and builds the software, and the operation team for testing and deploy the apps. This last team reviews the software delivered by the development team, and they give the feedback on any bugs that needed fixing. Then the development team would be in charge of making the corrections, generating a round-trip dynamic. On the one hand, implementing changes or corrections, and the other hand, giving feedback. A DevOps approach allows us to implement a series of phases and tools that collaborate in the different tasks that these teams have to perform: planning, coding, versioning, compiling, testing, deploying, and monitoring. The DevOps symbol is an infinite sign, suggesting that it's a continuous process of improving efficiency. We could say that DevOps focuses on reducing delivery time and the gap between development and operations teams without affecting the users. I had mentioned that between the development and operations area, a dynamic round trip is generated, and it is precisely that tools like Jenkins allow us to optimize and automate many of the critical tasks, making the development cycle faster, delivering more features and more frequently to users. Jenkins is then an open source automation server for creating continuous integration, continuous delivery environment, Java-based. PBAutoBuild is a command line tool created by Appium in PowerBuilder 2021 that can automate the entire build and deploy process outside PowerBuilder without needing any PowerBuilder license nor PowerBuilder IDE. Supports building all the PowerBuilder projects, client-server, PowerClient, and PowerServer. It's very good for DevOps, allowing us to create continuous integration, continuous delivery pipelines using Jenkins or other DevOps frameworks. What about PBAutoBuild improvements in PowerBuilder 2022? Well, now supports downloading source code from the Git branch, supports exporting the existing Git SVN source code settings from the project, for example, the Git branch name. We have a new property or setting called clear SRC before download what is exported to the JSON file. When exporting the settings from IDE to the JSON file, the SVN git login password will be encrypted and stored in the JSON file. So how do we start the process of using PBAutoBuild and then integrating it with Jenkins? Well, deploying our applications without using PowerBuilder IDE is relatively easy. Once we have an application ready to deploy it as client-server, PowerClient, or PowerServer, we must configure the respective projects just as if we were deploying it in PowerBuilder. Once the project is configured, we use the Export Build File option that is shown in the toolbar. This option will generate a JSON file with all the project information. If the deployment will be done from a different PC, then we must provide a copy of the source code and its resources. This copy can be provided from a Git or SVN repository. The next step will be customize the exported JSON file. We open the file in any editor, for example, Visual Studio Code or Notepad, and adjust the values, for example, in the source control or build job sections according to the case. Once we have made the desired changes to the file, we open a command window in administrator mode or go directly to Jenkins to create an execution task. The command line that will be entered for any environment will follow the following standard. We place the PBAutoBuild command .exe depending on the version of PowerBuilder. In this case will be 22.0.exe space /f space and in quotes the full path of the JSON file. You can also use a relative path which is relative to the JSON file location. Optionally, we can add more parameters, for example, to generate a log file, also to generate an error log file. If we want, we will have to indicate the respective parameters. For a log file, /l will be indicated, and for error log, /le as shown in the example. Finally, the log files will be generated under the same path as the JSON file. These considerations are sufficient for deploying client-server and PowerClient applications. We'll see later the considerations for PowerServer apps. In addition to the parameters just mentioned, there are others that could be interesting to include. For example, for PowerServer projects, /lu, which writes the unsupported PowerScript features to a file. And in case we use SVN or Git repositories, we can specify the password for login, in case it hasn't been specified in the JSON configuration file. The entire build process is made up of several steps, and additional commands can be executed before and or after some particular steps. For example, removing folder before downloading the source code. Step 1. Create a bat file which contains the following command and save the bat file as command delete folder.bat. Then step 2. In the build JSON file, locate the build plan pre-command subsection and add the file path and name of command delete folder.bat. Before looking at the considerations for PowerServer projects, let's walk through the steps to integrate the PBAutoBuild command with Jenkins. First, we install Java version 17, then we install Jenkins 2.3 version or higher. Once Jenkins is installed, we start it as a Windows service. It may be on Windows 10. From a browser, we enter the console and enter the administrator credentials. Once inside the administrator portal, we look for the new item option, then enter a name of the task. For practical purposes, it is recommended that it be one associated with the operation or type of application to be deployed. A section called General will open, and our next step will be to go to the Build Steps section and choose the option Execute Windows Batch command. This option will open a text box to place a Windows command, In this case, we'll use the PBAutoBuild.exe command following the format we saw earlier or the example in this image. In this example, we aren't considering logs files because Jenkins automatically saves the output each time the task runs. We'll see this part in the demo. Optional, in case the source code is in Git, you must configure the source code management section of the Jenkins task. After open the PowerBuilder IDE, open a client-server project and choose Export Build File option. We can leave default values because we will not use Git or SVN for this demo. Now we have the new build JSON file generated. So we can create a new folder, for example, in this case executable, where we can save the resources, the PVDs, and the executable file. Now we can edit the exported JSON file. In this case, we need to customize the build JSON file. For example, we can use relative path relative to the JSON file location. We can create to encode a .bat file for post commands. For example, to copy the generated PVDs and the .exe. Since these commands will be executed from Jenkins, we must enclose the full path in quotes. Now in the post command attribute, we specify the name for this .bat file. Finally, we make the last adjustments. Using relative path in the build JSON file is a good option, but it is not mandatory. We save the changes, and now our JSON file is ready to be called by PBAutoBuild from Jenkins. So let's go into the Jenkins console. In Jenkins, we add a new item using freestyle project and giving a name. Okay. Now we need to look for build steps section, add build step, execute Windows batch command. Now we call PBAutoBuild, indicating the arguments /f and the JSON file name in quotes, as you can see in this example. Then apply and save. Build now option. After some seconds, we can see the results in the console output. Now we are ready to run our application from the new folder called executable. Now we are going to look at a couple of examples with PowerClient applications. Using the same app, we open a PowerClient project. We can check different sections of the project. For example, in client deployment, we can check the web server to use. Also, make sure the CloudOps launcher has been uploaded before. After checking everything, export the PowerClient build file. Now we have a second JSON file, which will also customize, for example, starting with the relative path, remembering that this is relative to the JSON file location. If we want, we can take a look at all the sections of the project. General section, libraries, external files, runtime section. And for the next part of the demo, we are going to see this area, deployment server options. We save the changes, and now our JSON file, PowerClient, is ready to be called in Jenkins. Similar to client server, in Jenkins we add a new item, freestyle project, and we need to give an item name. Now we need to look for add build step, execute Windows batch command. Then we place the call to PBAutoBuild, similar to how we did it on client server. Click on build now, wait a few seconds and check the messages in console output. Finally, we run the new PowerClient app deployed. Now we'll make another PowerClient deploy, creating an installation package. Previously, we can create a new folder to save this file. In this case, the folder is package PowerClient app. In the JSON file, we look for client deployment section, and in our deployment server options, we change the value to 1, which means package the compiled app and manually deploy later. Then we can replace the output path value using the full path where the new folder was created. We go back to Jenkins and directly click on Build Job. We wait for the results. Now what we have to do is go to our new folder and run the newly created package by PBAutoBuild from Jenkins. Finally, we run the PowerClient app again to confirm the deploy. Now we'll see the considerations and a demo to deploy the 2 tiers of PowerServer applications. As far as the client side is concerned, its configuration is very similar to PowerClient. It only be necessary to consider additionally the web API URL to which it will connect. This information can also be modified in the JSON file. For the web API tier, we must consider PBAutoBuild will automatically generate the C# code of the .NET solution. The information regarding where this code is generated is in the section Web APIs, subsection Solution Generation in the build JSON file. For the client app, optionally customize the build JSON file. For example, source control and build JSON pre-command section. And then to publish the web API, you can create a bat file which contains the following command and save the bat file as publish.bat. However, if we are going to use Jenkins, we can replace this step, adding a Windows command within the task that we'll use to deploy our PowerServer application. This instruction is using the .net.exe command, to which we pass three parameters. The first, the published word, then the file name and full path containing the server API's project. Finally, the destination folder where the compiled web API will be hosted. In our demo, we also see additional steps to host from Jenkins the web API within IIS. In PowerBuilder IDE, open a PowerServer project, one that has been previously configured and tested. We export it to get the JSON configuration file that we'll then customize, similar to what we did in PowerClient. This project differs from the others because it has the Web API section, which we'll use in Jenkins and IIS to publish the Web API. The properties to take into account are solution location and the Web API URL. Now let's create a subfolder inside inetpub www root to host the Web API inside IIS. Once created, copy the full path and open the IIS administrator. Add a website and enter the name of the site and paste the full path of previously created folder. We also place the same port that had the Web API URL property inside the JSON configuration file. We confirm that the site has been added and now go to the Jenkins console to add a new task. We add an item or freestyle task. Then we add the first command that will serve to execute PBAutoBuild, who will deploy the client part and create the .NET solution, that is, the C# source code of the PowerServer web API. Now we'll compile and host the PowerServer web API in IIS, following 4 additional steps or commands, which I indicate below. Once these 4 additional steps are completed, we click on Build. We must wait a few seconds while all the steps are executed, the publication of the client part with PBAutoBuild, and also the compilation and deployment of the PowerServer web API. Now we can verify that all the steps were successful, especially the last 4 steps to publish and run the PowerServer web API on IIS. Once we see the website of the web API PowerServer in IIS is running, we can run the client application from a browser. Regarding the necessary components that must be installed on the Application Manager PC, they are: first, we need to install the PowerBuilder runtime. We can generate this with the PowerBuilder runtime packager tool from a PC where the PowerBuilder IDE is installed. This utility will generate an installation file, which will copy to the Application Manager PC or other operator. Second requirement, we must install PowerBuilder utilities using the PowerBuilder installer. This installer option will provide us with different build tools, such as Orca and of course PBAutoBuild. The supported operating systems to run PBAutoBuild are the ones shown on this slide. Optionally, the application manager can choose Jenkins as a tool to perform their deployments and later take advantage of the other automation options that Jenkins provides. And to publish PowerServer applications, you must first install the .NET 6 runtime, and if you also want to host these applications in IIS, for example, you must install the .NET 6 hosting bundle. Well, with this latest information on the installation requirements, I finish my presentation on how to perform two of the most important tasks in a DevOps environment: compilation and deployment, in this case of our PowerBuilder applications using PBAutoBuild and Jenkins. If you have any questions or comments, do not hesitate to write right now. Finally, remember the different official Appian channels to find out about the latest news and also so you can give your feedback. Thank you very much for your attention.